agenda. So what do we do about people?
I just got in. There was a mismatch.
So Neil just put it on Facebook.
Okay. Who all is actually in? Most of the committee, it looks like.
It looks like most of the committee is in, and we have 2 attendees in the audience.
I think Neil, I just posted on that page, the front page of the website, and it's on Facebook.
Cool. Sorry about that, guys.
It's kind of a bummer.
All right, let's give it a minute or 2 longer, as I'm seeing a few other people starting to join.
What do we do about people to whom we gave the?
If you could direct them either to the Facebook page.
You can copy the invite on the participants dialog box. You can just copy the invite link and paste it in an email or a text. That's like probably the fastest way.
Hi, everybody. We're just giving a few more minutes. We did have an issue with connecting through Zoom link, so apologies for any confusion, and thank you for joining us tonight. We have 4 people in the attendees, and I believe we have majority of the members.
Yeah, we have a quorum here, Vivian.
If you don't mind, I'm going to take roll call for tonight. Martha Seibert.
Here.
Robert Bell. Sean Fitzgerald. Suzanne Wright.
Here.
Pamela Angelakis.
Here.
Max Casper.
Here.
Ilana Bebchik.
Here.
Thank you. Martha Raymond.
Here.
Michael McClung.
Here.
Tim Cooper. Jose Alvarado. Kevin Breen.
Here.
Eric Stewart. A. Randall Hughes.
Here.
David Zucker.
Here.
Latanya Knowles.
I think she's trying to get in.
I think so too. Scott Burke.
Here.
Christine Colella.
Here.
Thank you. Katie Porter Roberts. Oh, did I miss anyone?
Matt Kirshner, I'm here.
Oh, Matt, thank you. You have a quorum.
All right, so I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:44. And the only thing on the agenda is to review the Stanley site plans. And
So the topic for tonight is very brief, and we're trying to keep it we're trying to simplify it. So during last week's meeting, we presented, as everyone knows, the various options. We also mentioned that we will be having a balloon test at the Stanley site, where we were excited to do so and had many participation from the SBC as well as the surrounding neighbors. And so we wanted to come back to the SBC and talk about the various options that are possible for the Stanley site. I'll turn it over to Lee and David to present on these, but in advance to that, I want to make a mention that we spent a lot of time as a group, and in particular, LBA and Lee, in going back and really looking at the Stanley site, examining what the potentials can be for that site, as well as truly listening to the community, to the abutters, to the various neighborhoods.
Hey, Vivian, can I interrupt you? Miss Mackey, I mean, Latanya's emailing me and said that she's in a room with a bunch of people for Zoom and I'm not here. So I'm not really sure. We should figure out how to transfer those people before we go.
Can you, Suzanne, can you copy that invite from the participants channel and text it to Ms. Mackey?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, she says there's about 15 people over there, including our town administrator, who she is passing the link on to get over here. So if we just wait maybe a minute or so.
Sure.
I think that's a good idea. Just make
Okay.
sure she shares it to everyone there. Should we have someone stay in that location?
I don't know how this works, Michael.
Well, I don't really know who opened that location if none of us did. Maybe she did.
Scott, from the attendees, you had your hand up and requested to speak.
Yeah, I'm just curious, are we able to communicate or,
We will be asking for, definitely, we will be asking for comments and feedback from the audience. So when appropriate, we do have public comments section that will be more than happy to call on you then.
sounds good, thank you.
You're very welcome.
I just sent a link that works to Sean. I don't know.
He did get on. I saw him joining.
Got it.
Thanks, guys.
I can open a second device and monitor that other room in case somebody shows up to try to send them here.
Scott, I think that's a good idea.
I was gonna say, I can do the same.
At least one of us should do that.
Oh, I need to. So frustrating. I'm trying to text people that have been texting me.
We're starting to get more attendees, so, which is good.
Does somebody know exactly which meeting it was they're in?
It must be the one from the agenda.
I'm in the other meeting right now. I'm just gonna talk to Latanya about how we can share the link.
So I just want to make sure we understand exactly what happened for, open meeting law considerations. It's possible that the meeting was noticed inaccurately, but we can still have an informational session as long as no deliberation goes on.
Deliberation as far as asking questions or deliberation as far as making any
Deliberation.
decisions?
As far as the committee making any decisions or expressing any opinions, maybe.
Hey,
Mike, what if we
Mike.
moved
That
Yeah.
will be I only, is it the ZBA? Is that what you just posted? So it's
No.
the school, the public school calendar, and it said new Zoom. Oh, it's the school calendar. It's not the town website. No, it's the.
I hear Peter Spelios asking a question regarding procedure.
Yeah, Peter, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Mike, I would just suggest having Scott or Christina, whoever, just sit in that other room and just redirect. If you redirect everybody from that, I think you can cure your issue.
Okay.
But there needs to be
Scott
there needs to be someone there redirecting people.
Scott has expressed the ability to be on a second device in that room and in another device on this room.
I do see two individuals from the attendees that have raised their hand. If it is pertaining to public comments, we will definitely have time to open the forum for public comments and interaction where we'll allow for you to speak. Otherwise, if you still have any questions, I'll grant you a moment. Ariane?
Yeah, this is Ariane. I was in the other room. So Latanya is actively trying to get people over here. And it was announced in that room that Scott Burke had emailed those of us in precinct 6. So several of us did get back into this going through the email that Scott Burke sent out.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tyler, you have a question? Please unmute yourself.
Just to report that I was in the other room and followed the instructions to go to the public school calendar where I think Letitia, if I get the name correctly,
Green, did you get on it?
had added a new meeting, which I clicked on. So I'm in. So hopefully others can follow the same.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Apologies for the confusion, everyone, but we're just giving it a minute longer in order to ensure that everybody that needs to get on is on. Is Katie Porter Roberts able to join tonight?
I don't see her on here, Vivian.
I don't either. I just wanted to make sure. I know that Latanya is.
She's usually not good until after bedtime, so.
Okay.
It's a little late when we start at 6:30.
So are we waiting for Latanya to join this meeting as well?
Latanya said she wasn't going to be able to join this meeting because she had something else.
You just joined. We actually have a meeting going on at a different link because they changed the meeting.
We have a few people on the other website trying to divert people.
Okay. I hear her voice, but I just don't see her joined in.
I think we can start now. It looks like no one else is coming over, but do you think?
Yeah, we have 19 people in attendance. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And again, apologies for all the confusion that the various Zoom links have created. We hope that you've had the opportunity to follow along and connect to the actual meeting link. And we'll get started for tonight. We did call the meeting in order at 6:44 p.m. Tonight's presentation is in response to the various comments and feedback we've been receiving from the general public, as well as from the abutters of the Stanley site and the community at large as a whole. We did have last week a balloon test where we placed cones and balloons at the Stanley site to determine the actual massing of the K-4 proposed on the Stanley site, the location, as well as how high the building would be and how visible it would be throughout the neighborhood. Intentionally, it was left there for a few days extra so that others from the community and the abutters can come around and get a chance to see it for themselves. Based on that, we heard a lot of feedback and conversation, which we are very excited about because this is actually what we look for. This, as we've stressed before, we as a group, not only Hill International as your owner's project management team, but LBA as your design team, truly do take pride in listening to the community and taking the comments and the feedback that you provide and translating it back into drawings that are, in essence, a representation of the school for you. This is a school specifically for the Swampscott community. So we take that to heart and we appreciate all of your feedback. And this is our representation of trying to give you back what you presented to us. Lee and David, I'll definitely turn it over to you to go through and walk us through the various options that you have tonight.
Thanks, Vivian. I just want to go over the next steps so everybody understands the next few weeks, what we will be doing and how we will be meeting. So a week from tonight, we have another SBC meeting. The intention of that meeting is to further review and hopefully reduce the number of options under consideration through deliberation and review. Following in October, on October 13th, the next SBC will actually be the meeting where the preferred solution is identified, and we need a formal approval from the committee for our preferred schematic report submittal, which we'll be preparing for the MSBA. Following a week later, on October 20th, we'll present that preferred solution to the larger community. And then early November, we'll submit the PSR into the MSBA for their review and feedback as part of the build up to the MSBA Board of Directors approval of that preferred solution to take it into schematic design.
So the next few weeks and the next few meetings are critical.
Shall I start?
Absolutely, Lee. Take it away.
Thank you. First of all, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I really want to first thank everybody here, the board and all the neighbors and community for coming tonight. This was important to us because it represented a way for us to look at specifically the Stanley site, which has gotten obviously the most comments. We would be talking about the Hadley site today, but we really didn't get any comments on it. And because our job is to give you a viable alternative for every enrollment and every site that we come up with, we really felt like this deserved some more effort. And when we talk about the process for this kind of project, usually you do kind of a diagram and you look at the programming and you put it on the site and you say, okay, this is the basic fit of the school or whatever on the site. Because Swampscott's a complicated little town, right? And the Stanley site even further so, it required more attention. And that is something we're happy to do and we want to do. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at this. The first thing we wanted to do was say, here is the 7A, which was the 3-story scheme in front of you. And basically there were a number of public comments over the last month, I think. A couple of months ago, we were starting to hear some things, but it's really only been the last few weeks that we're really hearing from people around the Stanley site, except for maybe a Doreen or someone or Jaren who have been involved all the way through. And so we're hearing a lot of comments and they're all good. I heard some of them in person and we hear a lot of them in meetings. What we decided to do was to look at this, analyze it and say, what the comment, how can we resolve as many of these comments as possible to give you the chance to choose whatever site you or whatever enrollment you think is proper. If somebody doesn't want a K-4 on this site, there's nothing I can say tonight to convince you to do that. If somebody wants it somewhere else, that's another story. But if you're open-minded and you realize that we are listening and that I don't necessarily have a horse in this race, I'm just trying to make this as good as possible, we might learn something together. Thank you. Here are the basic community comments for the Stanley site that we've heard. There have been others or back and forth, and I kind of put them in order. Right in the beginning is the idea of building scale and character. Can we build a school in this kind of enclave within this neighborhood with all of the tree buffer and all of that fits with a fairly large population for a school as an elementary school, and kind of make it a double school, a lower and an upper school, so that internally, especially, we can create small learning environments. So that's something that we really need to focus on. Site traffic and parking is probably the biggest reason why most of the people are here. We've employed Rebecca to look at site traffic over and over. And for every different scheme, we've looked at different ways to handle and to minimize neighborhood traffic. But some of the things that became more apparent, you know, as you really like listen to people and observe, you know, the proximity to the neighbors. This site there's a few neighbors on the north side of the site, which on this drawing is the upper, which are quite close. And, you know, we've talked to some of them. And on the Forest Ave side, there's one neighbor specifically right there. And the UU Church is a neighbor too. In many ways, this site is really kind of this tree-lined, you know, buffer, but there are people who are adjacent, and we have to be really careful about that. I think it was a couple of architects on the in the community that talked about the idea of the site entry experience, which I take to heart. What happens when you drive in, and what do you see? What are you confronted with? How does it feel? And that kind of continues into the idea of site views and fit. Does the building fit on the site properly? Are there the right kind of views and open spaces? The perimeter tree buffers are a huge advantage here. And then there are a couple other things that came up and will continue to come up pretty strongly. The use of Cedar Street and the use of, say, the UU church lot. Both of those have been tested or looked at in terms of an exit way only from the site in order to disperse and to lessen traffic in and out. Another concern has been about what about the existing woods and the existing wetlands? Protect them. Outdoor play space and open space is a huge concern. And lastly, I remember a lot of discussion about creating safe pedestrian routes to the school from outside, and in particular from Forest Ave, where a lot of students will probably go. If I were to analyze this particular diagram for a school, I think that the biggest thing that I would change from this, or you know, the kind of modifications I would make to this kind of diagram, are at the top of the page where you see the school, and when you come in the entry, and there's a corner right there, and there's a 3-story wing there. On this particular scheme, there's a 3-story wing on either end, and it has a fairly close proximity to neighbors and to the Whitman Street. And I think that's one of the first things that really catches your eye. And all we want to do is we want to improve it to continue to test and to modify to see if this can work. Hit the button, please. The footprint of 7B, which is a 2-story school, as you can see, if you can see, just gets closer and closer. And I personally think, at least for this design, that a 2-story school in this configuration is not a very good or advantageous approach. Keep in mind throughout, if you look closely, you'll see a dotted line of Stanley. All of this is predicated on the idea of keeping Stanley in place in this particular approach, because that way, if you can keep Stanley open, you have walled off disruption, but the kids can stay there. You don't have to buy temporary classrooms, and there's less disruption of moving children around. So there's a number of things that we wanted to address here, and let's go to the next slide. So what we're going to do during this presentation quickly is we're going to show these little sketches that I did that show what the building looks like in mass or in heights. So if I were to look where that arrow is coming in at the Whitman Road, and then I went up a little bit and flew in the air because I'm a bird now, I can look at this kind of axonometric drawing. And basically it shows you the wing, the long wing that faces the neighborhood, and the stepping of the 1-story. So you see a 1-story and a 3-story. And most of this building is 3-story, and then there's kind of a 2-story piece where the cafe is, kind of like a deck. And that's the makeup of this particular diagram. So the challenge and the opportunity here was to listen to all the comments, to take everything that we've learned over the last month or so, and to try to come up with something that was much more, that feels better on the site and maybe helps this become a better project. And that's my whole goal. Next. We're going to show you two approaches to the site, which are, one is radically different and one is just a little bit different than the one that we had drawn before. And a lot of it all has to do with criteria and what you're using as your you know, the things you cannot change. In this particular case, what we did was we said, what if we do a 3-story building, but we take down Stanley before construction starts? Just like at the Hadley School, that would require that, and we can talk about this, that the students of the Stanley site in this particular option would be moved to temporary classrooms at the middle school and at Hadley. I know that Vivian looked at some diagrams to see if they fit and has a basic plan for that, if that were the case. Again, none of these are the choice. We're just giving you a couple options. What this does is open up the field. It opens up the site. And if you were to look at a perfect site, the site in a perfect way, say the Stanley School wasn't there, you really would want to take the school and put it along the back edge. Again, along the woods at Ewing Woods. And the reason for that is it's the furthest away from the entry and from the neighborhood. And it's bracketed by 60-foot trees all the way around. And those 60-foot trees really kind of hug a 42-foot building. If you looked at a balloon, when you looked at one of those balloons against those trees, you really see how it kind of nestles. So in this way, it has a good distance. The advantages of this approach is that when you come in at the site, you really see the building in front of you. One of the comments was, you have a front door in the front and a front door in the back, 2 schools. Can I see them both? So this scheme, what it does is you come in and there's a upper school and a lower school entry. And off to one side is the lower school, off to the other is the upper. It's a very, very simple diagram. Simple is good. It has a good fit on the site. It could even be made to, we talked a little bit about even pulling it away a little further from the Forest Ave neighbor, which we can do. And it has safe pedestrian play. And again, the layout is really good for the educational vision of the two smaller schools in one. Some of the limitations, though, are that because the queuing, if you look at the road coming in off of Whitman, you would come in, come around, and then drop off on the long side. The queuing is shorter than in before, but we do take out all that loop road on by Ewing Woods, so it's a lot nicer back there. And by being queued, and we have a couple of traffic diagrams that we worked on to show how far cars would go back. So it's a little shorter. And clearly the demolition of Stanley would require temporary classroom costs and disruption. And that is why we didn't do it in the first place. But this building is going to be here for 70, 80, or in Swampscott, 100 years. And it's going to be built like that. And you want to do something that you're going to be proud of throughout that time, if it's going to work the best. So we decided to try this kind of thing to see if it worked for you. One of the other things to notice here is that you can come in Whitman and either go out through Cedar in this one or out through the parking lot at the UU Church. Many of us spent some time down by the Cedar area and realized that it is, and I think it was Tyler who talked about it, he had some really good points about that. And I think we're all finding that the Cedar connection is a difficult one. And it's something that if we can avoid that, that would be good, but we still need to have a second means of egress or way out of here. And so we'll talk about it in the next click. This just shows what the outline of 7A is. So you can see how very different this is laid out. And it's all really because we're able to take down Stanley in this one. and look at the site very differently. By the way, the building is also very well oriented to the sun. Basically, north-south is the bottom and the top of the site in this drawing. So all the classrooms get really, really good orientation, therefore energy, therefore daylight. And that's how we want to do a building. Next. And lastly, you can imagine a very simple building, and because it's against the back, against those trees, it's across a field, and it has some stepping, and it has different components to it. But it's a pretty efficient school, and obviously in the future we can show other kinds of renderings and things. But I really wanted to show you these kind of diagrams that I can draw by hand, so you can start to get a sense of kind of things that we're trying to accomplish here. So, is that perfect? Well, it is a radically different approach, and we did it because of all the comments that we were hearing, and because we want to see if we can do our best job. Next. In terms of queuing and drop off, these are hard to read at first, but if you really focus, you'll see the building and you'll see Whitman. The whole idea here is that we always show a morning drop off and an afternoon. The morning drop off, if people come in off Whitman, everybody, they come around and they drop off in front of the school. If you look closely, there's red and blue cars, and all those are in the morning. It's really not a big deal. We can get everybody off right on the straightaway in front of the school and then out, either one direction or the other, or even loop around and back out through Whitman. Morning is not our big problem. Morning is when there are a lot of vehicles, but they come very spread out, and they come in a very distinct way. And we've learned a lot from our traffic expert about this. They do models, they do predictions, and they've done this before. So we know what the queuing lengths are, and that's actually that queue of red and blue cars there is close to 600 feet. So the morning work like that. Next. What's interesting on this one, remember how in the limitations I had said that the queuing length was less than it was before on site? Well, you can see what happens in the afternoon. Cars come and even double up because we have 2 lanes, but you can see the red cars go down Whitman and all the way to, down Orchard and all the way to Nason. And at that point, you could get some traffic or some people trying to turn in and out and waiting for cars to proceed. And that's why I thought that was a limitation of this particular layout, because in the afternoon, it's definitely tougher. So it's something to think about. Now, we can always try to remedy that and try to lengthen the queue, but that is a very, very important thing to us. On the right, you're going to see these numbers. And these numbers were put together by the traffic consultant, and afterwards, maybe she can talk about them if people have specific question about numbers of vehicles and queuing and how they arrived at those numbers. I will also say that I think this is okay to say, Mike. Is it okay to mention the subject? Mike McClung.
I don't know exactly where you headed, but.
Well, the other than cars.
Well, yeah, I've become interested in trying to understand what would happen to these particular problems if we actually ask the traffic people to go and analyze busing at different perimeters from the school. Right now, we're statutorily required to bus beyond 2 miles, but what would happen to these pinch points and these queuing lanes and et cetera if we approached busing at 1.5 miles, 1 mile, 3/4 mile, 1/2 mile? We don't have that study in hand, and I can't opine until I see them, but I'd be interested, and I because of the public meeting noticing tonight, I can't ask other members to weigh in publicly, but I'd certainly encourage them to ask questions that they might have of the chair and of the design team independently. That's a question that I have individually.
Okay, and we wanted you to know that we're going to talk to the traffic consultant about the effect that certain radius of bus pickup would have on something like this, because it's been a comment. There's probably a couple of people who are listening who say you're preaching to the choir, and have brought that up for a while. And I think that people are listening, that's all. So that's that approach. Kind of a radically different approach, but let's go back to one that's a little bit different. Next. So when we start a project like this, we get all the information, we put on and we create a school or a site that fits the site and fits the program and all of that. It takes a while with a design to have it become not just a school for this site, but a school for this site and Swampscott. You have to know all about the people. You have to hear the comments. You have to hear the pressures. You have to understand where everyone's coming from. That's all been absorbing. And I feel like this particular idea here is a bit of a reaction in a good way, and kind of a synthesis of all the things we've been hearing, trying to resolve things as best as we can. Again, we can't solve everything. Buses may actually change the amount of cars coming to the site in a radical way. We don't know, but we can try to solve everything we can. So we have here what I call a 7D, same number of students. It says it's 3 stories, but it actually steps a lot. And this is what it's trying to do. And this is very interesting. Number one, it creates a front where there's gym and entrances and cafetorium. I hope Tyler likes this one because he's an architect. And the whole idea is that when you drive in on Whitman, what you see is the school in front of you, and it's further away from the neighbors, but it's also different scale. So when you drive in, you see the gym and the cafetorium and the entrance. Those larger pieces are 2-story, not 3. And the little pieces off the sides, those little angled pieces, are 1-story. So you actually drive in and you see kind of 1-story, 2-story, and then you see the entries. That whole that whole building right there is a very different scale. So those who say we want a 2-story building, that's what you feel and that's what you see. Then you would, one big thing I want to say here is this scheme is predicated on the idea of keeping Stanley. So for anybody who says, and maybe rightly so, we don't want to pay for temporary classrooms and we don't want the disruption, this design keeps Stanley in place through construction and then changes. So it also has longer on-site queuing than the last scheme we were just looking at. If you were to drive in and then turn, you come down and around the field and then come along a long drop-off and queuing area, which is quite a bit longer than that straightaway that just turned and went out. And in this scheme, if you look at it, we turn, go around the building in one way, come around and actually exit through, just exit through the UU parking area right there. So it would just come out and out. Again, we've been looking both at Cedar and at UU, and in this design, we felt like it was advantageous to come out through the UU, and that's because if you look at the top left corner, that's where Cedar would go, but there's a lot of buffer up there, a lot of trees, and remember how the grade all drops away. So we're trying to pull back there and leave a lot more of the existing trees and a lot more of that buffer right there and get away from the grade. So what this design does is allows you to kind of come around, sweep around. It also, and this is a point made by the traffic consultant, it takes, while a bunch of cars are coming in through Whitman, it takes a bunch of the cars back out again, out to the bit larger Forest Ave, which is kind of a whole nother direction, so that you don't have this kind of crossing of traffic and or queuing. And I think that disperses, an idea we had a long time ago is it disperses into different neighborhoods differently. It steps away from the neighbors quite a bit more than, so click the button, David. Right there, what you see is the outline of the 7A that we were looking at before. And you can see that the one-story building is in line with it, but it's only 1 story instead of 3. You see that whole line up against where the neighbors are, that used to be 3 stories, is now 1 story and then 2 stories. And then the whole concept here is then we put 2 very well-oriented schools behind. I say very well-oriented because those are 3-story schools, buildings, and they are facing the sun. So the classrooms are all oriented to the north and to the south, and it creates courtyards and areas for safe play. And so you have the upper school and the lower school of different lengths, but they're set back. They're pushed away from the neighbors even more, and they're behind the buildings so you don't see them. And it's kind of this idea of public and private. So you get all of the kind of public and louder stuff in the front, and then the kids have a place in the back that's very much quieter and access to the woods and things like that. And that's probably also something that's better than from before. And then it has a wonderful educational layout because it has the 2 entries, and then you can go to either side, but you can also have all the shared stuff. So imagine a community at night, you can park, and then we can close off the 2 back wings, and you have access to all of the front community shared spaces safely and without accessing the academic spaces. And like I said, it maintains Stanley. David, can you click? So what's interesting here is this is the view, but up in the air, obviously. I hope you can read these okay. From the entry side. So you can see that you'd come in, you see the edge, and you see the entries kind of on that angle. And again, that angle is taken from the sun and then those other buildings. And you see that there's a 1-story piece and then 2 stories, which is quite a bit lower than before. Then it jogs way back so that those wings are kind of settled back in there more. And then in this particular case, it has a 2-story and then 1 story back to the woods. We have looked at different, with an option like this, there's always more things you can do. Where the gym is, we can flip it with the cafeteria if we want the cafeteria there instead. And if that's got more glass and more openness and all of that, or if it's better for neighbors. Or we can try to soften that corner and take the gym and put it on top of the cafeteria in the back by the woods and make a much lower element and smaller element over by where the gym is that sets back even more. So I want you to just, with the idea that we're trying to listen to comments and respond to them, please understand that we've been really trying to do that and working hard to make this a building that has a smaller scale, that really helps on all the different edges of the site, that takes advantages of natural perimeter and buffers, and it creates safe spaces because this is an elementary school. I think that's it. Is that it for this, David? Oh, and then there's the idea of traffic. So in the morning, because we have a longer queue, we have absolutely no trouble in the morning with cars backing up. Any car would come down the street and drive onto the site, come around, and there should be, even on a really inclement day where there's kind of turquoise cars, there shouldn't be any real backup there at all. And then but in the afternoon, obviously, what's interesting about this scheme is that extra bit of queuing length that we have as it turns the corner and comes to the school. That allows us to get the cars just off of, mostly off of Orchard, the red cars for the backup. And that's the scenario where the cars back up. On a really inclement day, you might get the purple cars back to Nason. So we take that into consideration. One other interesting thing, if David, if you'll go back a couple, just the mention of buses and looking at that. This is interesting because actually the area, when you go around the loop, you drop off, and that area straight before it turns again is a natural kind of bus loading area or bus stacking area if there's a few buses. So it is interesting, when you hear more information that you could always see if that works as well. So what I wanted to do is just once again say that this is part of the process. You have a complex site with a complex set of people and ideas, and all we're trying to do is respond in kind and show you something that we think is actually, in this particular case, probably a great elementary school for the program that's being shown, and getting to be about as good as we could handle this particular site with its constraints. I think we've solved as best as we can so far, but there's always more that we can do if people want to continue to work on it. We're open up to comments or questions.
Yep, thank you, Lee. I do see, Michael, you have your hand raised.
Hey, Vivian, before anyone talks, I just, Lee, thank you for doing all this work. I know it was it felt probably like a really busy weekend for you. But we appreciate it. We appreciate your flexibility and your willingness to listen to everyone's issues.
I think that everybody, I just want to say, I think everybody out there who has a career understands when the rubber's hitting the road.
Right.
And when pride steps in and you say, I want to try to solve this. So,
no, it's awesome. We're super, super appreciative. And Vivian, since we had that little bit of a glitch at the beginning here, we just want to be really cognizant of open meeting laws and make sure we're doing everything right. So I think it's important for the school building committee members just to understand that, we want to hear from residents, and we want to also allow their questions. And we ask that the school building committee members refrain tonight from editorial or opinions. So feel free to ask your questions, just don't editorialize or opine. And we'll meet again next Tuesday to discuss after people have had time to hear what residents and Swampscott neighbors are saying, and we've had time to digest all this information.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you, Suzanne. Michael, you have your hand up if you wouldn't mind asking your question and unmuting.
Yeah, thanks. I did have a question for Lee. So you mentioned doing design work, and this is probably maybe a question for Lee and for Vivian. What we're looking at here, where does that fall on the spectrum of fully designed project and schematic proof of concept?
I would say that this is quite advanced. Obviously, it's another step, and it's another step of tailoring and of specificity than the box then is usually done at this level. But I think that you require that level because of the questions and because of this site in particular. And so this is definitely more schematic design level, but we feel like you needed to see more, and you may even need to see more, but we just wanted you to know that we understood that.
Thanks. Just trying to understand where we are.
Yeah, definitely a response more to the inquiries and questions from the community that collectively as a group, we felt that in order to best answer those, we need to progress the design and head towards more of schematic versus feasibility where we are currently.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions from the committee before I turn around and ask the attendees?
I have a quick question, Vivian.
Mm-hmm.
If in this 7D, if we took the school down first, is that something that speeds up or lessens our construction cost?
There's give and takes. If we do take down the building, definitely we'll have to understand that there's cost implications as far as having modular classrooms.
Right.
But there is also advancements that could be made to the construction on the flip side. If the site was available, we would be able to do all of the hardscaping, which is the roadway and the landscaping around the perimeter and in front of the building, all under one phase versus multiple phases. So depending on when the project actually, the building is completed, it might be as long as 6 to 8 months to complete all of the road work, the ring road around it, as well as the landscape field area. Considering,
I will say that it's extremely standard and typical for most of these schools to discover at some point that if you can build the new school on the same site as the old school, but keep it open, unless of course you have a big building somewhere else for swing space, it is usually much more cost effective, and you're not putting money towards things that you don't save. I think Paul is on the line here, the other OP. I mean, he likes to say, you know, if you're putting money towards temporary classrooms, you may not see that back. But I would say that it's this is a very typical way to be as efficient as possible.
It seems that we just also need to consider neighborhood impact of construction and, you know, teachers and parents not accessing the site and parking on the street, because, you know, you see the school being built in the parking lot.
absolutely, there definitely is going to be a lot of give and take.
Right.
As you see, the existing school is dotted here, and where the new school begins, there's a lot of closeness proximity wise. So granted, they might not be disrupted as far as being vacated from their existing classrooms. However, you know, there are going to be some noise implications at some times. Granted, we will work with the contractor and the town to minimize, but we can't eliminate.
Right.
In the past, I'm going to paint a rosy picture for a second, if you allow me. In the past, we've really created programs around the construction for the kids to see. They don't walk inside, but, you know, to learn about buildings, learn about systems and how things are done. And little kids with hard hats can become a wonderful opportunity if embraced. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it has to be done extremely carefully for health and safety.
And on the southern corner, that access to Forest Ave extension, is that meant to be a walking and riding path or like an emergency egress or something?
Yeah, the whole idea with Forest Ave extension is always that we can connect a single lane to it for emergency or maybe, you know, for emergency access. And we want it to be safe for bikes and pedestrian. And actually in this one, you would come in on the left side of that and come along the side and right up into the school. So I remember it was, please help me, the planning directors, planning board.
Angela.
Right. And this actually really addresses that issue, because you come in and you don't have to cross there, you go right to the school.
Right.
And I think that actually is a better, it works much better with the flow.
And if no one else is asking questions, I have another one about 7C. That's 3-story the whole way, or is there a potential of a 2-story on half of it and a 3-story on the other half? Or
there's always potential to go to step it some more, but really the way that the you know, we could do 1-2 stories and then step back to the third or something like that. We could study that. But I think what we really need, the height there's a limited amount of length. And I think that when you consider the academic needs for each of the schools on each side, they really kind of call for a 3-story solutions. And I mean, we can always look at the idea of making 1 2 stories and 1 3 if we feel like that's going to be better, because we can take one and move it out a little more and make it 2 stories. Those are the kind of subtle things that we can do. But I think you get the idea here that this is really a building against the woods.
No, I get it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the school building committee members? If no other, I'm going to start with attendees. Jonathan Lehman, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. I actually have a couple of questions. I'm wondering whether the square footage of the 7D option, how that compares with the square footage of the 7A option. Is it?
Well, yeah, it's really
the same?
interesting. Well, one of them is very square. Well, the 7A option, let's go back to the 7A plan. I'm not going to give you the exact, our square footage needs to meet, but there's a lot of, because of the way that this particular building was set up, if you look at the beige, there's actually a lot of circulation because we have to connect through and connect long buildings and things like that. And it's kind of more of a, in some ways it's a more compact building, but it's a little more difficult to get to things in its layout. And circulation is usually where you get excess square foot. I will tell you that as you look at the top and it says 155,000 square feet, that's what the MSBA is going to allow us to do. So we can't go over that anyway. So the other building, if we find any excess square footage, it'll be kind of like, hey, how can we get an extra classroom or something? Let's go to 7D for a second. And remember, this is a hand sketch, so it's not as pretty right now, and we can always do it. But actually, I think the circulation is about the same. You come in, there's a lobby, there's an area there, and then you go down in much shorter hallways, much more compact. And because the classrooms are kind of on both sides of the hall in this way, it shortens the hallway and it doesn't have to go as long. And in some ways it's more usable. So I would say that they're probably, I'm guessing, okay, Jonathan, but I would say that they're probably very, very similar in overall square footage to one another.
Thank you. So I think the second part of, it's more of a comment, is that I'm really impressed with 7D because to me, you've taken a lot of comments that you've gotten from the neighbors, and it's a design that was really meant for that site, as opposed to the other one, which is, totally symmetrical in it. The step backs address, the concerns with height, at least close to the road, that sort of thing. And there's another building nearby near us that had the same dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I believe it's the senior center in Marblehead on Humphrey Street, excuse me, is right on the street and is one story at the street, and there's a gym, kind of an all-purpose room behind it. So it's square, but I think it's a similar approach and a similar dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but people who kind of want to get an idea of what it would look like, if you agree, it's a similar approach. That's something right near us that you can see, and that
David,
I'm familiar
click
with.
to the 3D image for a second. I want to align with what Jonathan's saying. Again, the whole idea here, Jonathan, I think that you're responding to is having the lower stuff on the front. And as it steps up in the back, you literally, from the very front, you really don't see it. And it creates a whole nother world in a different way. And we can always work on that. It is something that we all employ. For example, if you look at the front of the gym and the cafeteria, some people would put kind of like porches there, one-story porches or arcades on the front of those, so that the kids, and it would make a one-story element there and lower the scale even more. So there's a lot of things we can do, as you're saying, and thank you for noticing that.
Thank you.
Jonathan, if you don't have any other questions, I'm going to move on to someone else.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Jack Berman, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Oh, there's my friend the otter. I'll start my, I can't start my video, I guess, but I just had a couple of questions. and I'll try to get it all out at once quickly. First of all, I didn't see a 7B. Was there a 7B? I thought I heard reference to it, but it went from A to C when you
Right.
showed.
We've shown it in the past, so let's go back and I'll tell you why we kind of shortened this right now. But let's go back, David.
Okay, if that's been done in other meetings that I wasn't at, that's fine. Because
well, what 7B is, it's taking 7A and making it, instead of 3 stories, it's making it 2 stories. So if you see the outline, it's just bigger. And you see that outline, it just gets bigger and bigger because it's 2 stories.
Oh, the red outline?
Yes.
Right. So you can see the inherent.
Okay, I got it.
In the system.
I was just looking for something that said 7B on it when you were talking about 7B. So, okay.
We might not be good at counting too.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Then my main questions, let me just give my main comment first, which is that it seems to me that the design you have for the D building looks good, but the other ones looked really good too. Also, it just seems like to me that assuming that you would never build a building that wouldn't meet the program needs for the educational program, that the traffic is going to really be key, because that can be a real mess. I put 4 kids through Stanley School, and it was a mess with the number of kids there now getting in and out of there. And people, right. You can draw plans about how people are supposed to do it, and people won't behave. So I really think that the traffic is going to be, in my opinion, is going to be the deal maker or breaker on the whole thing. My questions have to do with the play space on the site, which is there the kind of things that kids tend to do, younger kids, basketball court, playground, they do Foursquare and stuff like that. I couldn't really tell if there was space, that was going to be asphalt space or whatever, concrete space that was set aside for that, or whether there was a playground drawn into it.
Sure.
And then I also wondered about the open space that's left, whether the outside groups that sometimes use it, like soccer and baseball and softball, whether they're still going to be able to use it, or whether it's going to be a bunch smaller so that it's not really going to be usable for outside groups doing that sort of thing. That's all I have. Thank you.
I think that's good. Let's go to 7D for a second. I think it's the easiest way to talk about these. So 7D actually has the largest field of many of these. As you can see, it's actually bigger than the one, because I don't have the total loop road, and this building somehow does some interesting things on the site. The field is bigger than it was before. It's not as big as the exact of the field that is on there now. It's not as long, it's almost as long, but it's not as wide as the berm and the field that steps up right now, but it's not terrible. So I would say that that the field is it's about 36,000 square feet, and the other one is, I think, more like 50 something. So it's not as big as the field you have now. Obviously, we have a larger school, so that takes up more of the space, and we want to have good play space. So we're making it as open as we can and in a good way. The other attributes to this site are the idea of going to the woods. So anytime that we can have an easy connection to the woods, I think that I walked this site with Mike McClung a couple times. He said he went to Stanley. That must have been at least 80, 90 years ago, right, Mike? And they still
at least
had
100, my friend, 100.
100 years ago. And they had the same rocks and the rock storytelling area in there and all of the other things. And we want to preserve that and let kids use it. But lastly, in terms of play area, in terms of playgrounds, one of the neighbors talked to me, I think the other day, just about the existing play spaces behind Stanley, and how they kind of they embrace the woods and the rocks, and they just feel like they're nestled in there and all of that. And by creating these little areas, against the woods or this courtyard or, these smaller play areas, we hope to, one, we can always create hard top area for kids to do some things, like if they want to run around or on things. But we have a really great landscape architect who is excited about embracing Swampscott rocks, water, boats, and creating play spaces that kind of go with those. And I just like how these are these in particular are separated into different areas for K2 versus 3, 4 and all of that, so that the little kids can come out of the building and have different areas. So we are thinking about that, but they're not designed yet, but that's going to be a whole process among itself. And if you want to be involved in that, please join when we program that.
You know, I'm not sure that my questions were actually answered, but you know, in terms of is the space going to be big enough to use as a soccer field or a baseball field, or is there a plan for like basketball courts and asphalt for things like Foursquare and playgrounds, or are those just not done yet?
Well, they're not done yet. We have areas for those things. We have areas for those things which you can put Foursquare and basketball and things in different areas. The field itself is on a little bit of an angle, so we'd have to lay out to see what kind of field and or diamond can fit on that. I think it would be a little league diamond, and certainly not a big boy diamond, you know.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you.
Well, we will. Jack, I just want to say that we will lay things like that out, and we'll be as efficient as we can to get as much as we can on it.
Thank you, Jack. If you have no other questions, I'll move on to the next. Scott Fellman, please unmute yourself. Fellenworth, I apologize.
That's fine, Vivian, no problem. Town meeting member precinct 6. I'm curious, first of all, I just want to thank Scott Burke for sending the email out and making me aware of this meeting. I appreciate that, Scott. I'm curious as to what degree does, you know, in the light of the pandemic and COVID kind of driving virtual types of learning, to what degree does that play into your thinking around school design as we consider a school that's going to be around for the next 100 years?
It's a very huge question that you're just asking, only because I think one thing that we're being confronted, because we're doing research into it, and we also are actually helping Max is here. We're helping your school system do the health kind of analysis of different schools for COVID to see what you can do for healthy air and stuff like that. So we just want you to know that this is big on our mind. First of all, the classrooms that we're building are quite a bit larger by MSBA and typical standards than the classrooms you have now. They're 900 square feet, which allows you to have kids spread apart in more flexibility. I think the key to what you're asking is flexibility. I think one thing we're learning, especially with elementary school, is, and I'd like Pam to respond to this if she can. I think there was a quote.
Michael has his hand up as well, if needed.
Okay, I think there was a quote by your neighbor, who's the governor, who said something like, "That's just not how little kids learn to read." When you have little kids, you really would like them to be in person. They engage differently. They have a very short attention span. And can you imagine all the parents at home trying, as you know, many of you are home with, say, a 7-year-old trying to get them on Zoom. So in terms of the actual building and the space, especially for elementary school, it will change with integrated technology, but I think the spaces are still all required, and they have to be. But the biggest thing is health. The nurse and the air systems, this building or the building on another site, modern, will have healthy air systems with ventilation to get germs and all that stuff out in every classroom and every space, which you don't have now because they didn't do that back then. And that is a really huge part of the spread of any kind of disease like this. We really have to monitor and keep the air. So I don't think there's a huge physical change in the future. Obviously, right now, you're probably all struggling with what to do with your school. But this school would handle it much better because it has a lot more space to get kids in. Pam, do you have something to say? Or Mike?
Can I just follow up on that for 1 second?
Please do.
So I do appreciate your comments regarding flexibility. It seems like as we progress our learning models forward, with all due respect to the governor, there will be likely changes in the learning model as low as these young grades.
With all due respect to the governor.
It felt
I didn't
like
mean to say it like that. I just had heard it on PBS.
well, don't worry. I've coached Charlie's kids, so don't worry about that.
Okay.
I just wonder if there isn't some like flexible approach that might reduce the footprint and give us ways to incorporate more virtual learning approaches. That was kind of where I was headed with that.
Yeah. So far, that hasn't. Now we're not 10 years from now, so I would say this. The big deal. Remember how they used to have flexible schools, but they were open plan, and that turned out to be pretty much a disaster. You know, because people need walls and things too.
Yep.
What we want to do is we want to build schools that we call future ready. And that means that we build a building, but we build the walls so that they all can be easily torn down and changed. The worst thing you can do is build it all out of cinder blocks and stuff so you can't move it. And realize that spaces in the future, technology is going to change every 5 years, and different spaces are going to be used very differently. And what we'll do is on the interior of the building, especially, we'll try to create walls and things that can be easily removed, change the sizes of things in 20 years when you find you have to do that. But I'm not really able to talk to you about big changes in educational classroom and sizes because frankly, they're not doing that yet.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that change.
Plus, I feel as though if that does occur, it happens at the later years and the older grades versus the kindergarten through the 4th grade generation. But I'll have Pam speak to that since she's more of an authority than I would be.
Mike, you had your hand up. You go first, and then I'll chime in.
Oh, well, I can't speak from an educational standpoint, but I feel as though I can speak from a process standpoint. We began this process in the quote unquote normal times, and we find ourselves in different times that has caused the committee some challenges in terms of outreach and public attendance and the like. And I just want residents and taxpayers to understand we have approached the MSBA and asked for some relief on the schedule so that we could understand in a little clearer sense what we were dealing with and how we could adapt to the new world we're in. And we did get an extra 4 weeks to process what we're doing. But beyond that, I think we are. I hesitate to use the word stuck, but I'm trying to come up with a synonym. We are in the process that we're in, and we have no, beyond an extra 28 days, we have no further remedy to try and adapt, resolve, whatever the word is, to the new normal.
Well, we're on a partnership timeline with the MSBA, and
Well,
the end date is fixed with them. And they have, it's interesting because we have looked for guidance from them and the AIA and the MSBA. The AIA have put out a lot of things about COVID, but not about the future. We're learning a lot about wellness and health, especially, and the future of these buildings. So we want to make sure that especially systems and materials are right. But the MSBA is completely still locked in and dedicated to these projects, just like this. They're still funding, they're still into it. They're giving a little bit of leeway so we can listen to people more and thus we can do this sort of work. But they don't seem to have, I think it would take them 20 years to change course educationally.
That's not a great comment on our educational leaders.
Well, I will tell you that we work in a lot of different states, and the Massachusetts funds schools and takes them more seriously than just about anywhere else I've ever been. And so in that way, although it is a bureaucracy, I would consider it a fairly stable and strong bureaucracy. I'm not defending them, I'm just saying that there's a lot of places that schools are not funded by the state at all. And it's really harsh.
Well, that's heartening. I just one last comment and then we can move on. I just know that my business, we're rethinking our entire model. My customers are rethinking their entire models. And I have to imagine from an educational perspective, we should be rethinking our models. And not to say that, you know, virtual is a replacement for in-person, because I'd never be an advocate for that, but innovation and creativity and how we design the facilities that we're building for the next 100 years,
right,
feels like it should incorporate that thinking. But I understand where we're at. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say that another thing that we're doing in terms of innovation is that if you look at this plan, you're going to see a lot of spaces in that used to be hallways that are actually have little circles and are places. What we learn is that smaller groups can now go out, and this is part of COVID as well, is to create smaller units and cohorts, and they can go out in different places in smaller groups and do projects and things. So we call it everywhere learning, and that means that the whole building that the hallways are not just hallways, they're used for things, and it's another way to spread out kids and give more flexibility and opportunity. So that might be the kind of thing that you're also thinking of.
Also, with this new building, you have a lot more square footage than you currently have dedicated to each of the classrooms, just because the MSBA guidelines far exceeds what you currently have. So inevitably already you'll have more square footage, as well as dedicated areas for nurses and, you know, health providing within the school itself will be a lot larger and more dedicated, with actual sick areas for children to be isolated. That's one other way that could be addressed, not only due to COVID, but just in general design of the building per MSBA guidelines, and, you know, just getting it ready for the future. Pam, I know we kind of cut you off a few times. Did you want to chime in at all?
Well, I think, hi, Mr. Fillenworth, I knew where you were going with that in terms of any kind of remote learning. And I would just echo what some people said in terms of the fact that at the early years, I don't see remote learning being where it occurs. I think there's too many social, emotional, developmental things that we focus on outside of academics at the elementary levels. And I would just say that if that were going to occur, it may be something that we rethink for the future in the upper grades. In addition, I think we've talked a lot about the flexible spaces, small learning spaces within the building, the fact that health and safety with a lot more sinks and places to wash their hands, in addition to the health suites that we are creating in our current existing buildings in the pandemic right now, versus a tiny closet that is a nursing office in our districts and in our buildings before the pandemic hit. So I think we're learning a lot from the pandemic. I just really feel strongly, having my strong elementary background, that I don't think the elementary grades K-4 would ever be moving towards a remote model in any shape or form outside of the in-person interpersonal growth that happens between kids. That's all I was going to add.
Thank you. If no other questions, I'll move on to the next individual. Keiko, you have your hand up if you don't mind unmuting yourself.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate it. I really just a couple questions. First, I just wanted to comment on the thoughtfulness and consideration of especially neighbor comments and concerns around the Stanley site. It really shows in these two new options tonight. So I really appreciate that. Full disclosure, I live on Nason. I'm a town meeting member, precinct 6. The two questions that I had, and actually this might be more directed specifically to Suzanne. Suzanne, I remember you mentioned there was something about a mailer that's going out that has more information. Has that already gone
Actually, the mailer has been, excuse me, is currently at the printers, is being on the final stages of printing and should be distributed shortly.
Okay.
However, the mailers, obviously, since they're going out soon, have not captured 7C and 7D as the options. I guess what we're looking to learn from those mailers is more of if the community is inclined towards a district-wide 3 to 5 or a district-wide K through 4, or keeping, renovating the Hadley as is in kind. It's more, we're planning on using that information obtained from the mailer as a guideline to see where the community is headed. Granted, either options, either a district-wide 3 to 5 or a district-wide K through 4, would have to go through the process. As we mentioned earlier, we're still in the feasibility stage of this, and the design is fluid, and as you see, is reacting to comments and interpretations and advancing as we go along. So the final product, might look exactly as this on the screen of 7D, or it might have lots of changes, and that will come throughout the phase as we move in towards the design development.
Okay. So I guess questions slash comment on this then would be, because I have no idea what the mailer looks like. Is that being explicitly described for people to respond to, that like ultimately, like, we need to know, do you favor K to 4 or 3 to 5? And what are your thoughts on basically the, the three, physical site footprints, as it were, or, like site locations?
The mailer is identical to the survey and brings you to the survey online.
Okay.
So exactly what's in because we wanted to keep it very, specific on those points.
Yep.
So it's about site enrollment, and it shows the diagrams.
Okay.
And it asks people, which one that they prefer for different aspects, education, sustainability, just like exactly like the survey. And its point, I believe, is to direct greater number of people either to send that in or to the survey itself who would not know about it, because obviously it's hard to get people to know about these things.
Okay. So last question that I have, will the survey that's online that we're ultimately directing people to, will the 7C and 7D options be added there? Because I have a feeling, even just amongst some of my own neighbors seeing this tonight, this might change their opinion if they've already filled it out, or if, so that folks have a complete picture of all options that are on the table right now.
I think I'm going to lessen that a little bit and say that, the survey is not a vote, right?
Sure.
The survey is a way for a certain number of people to express their opinion or their selection, because if there are 15,000 people in town and we get 500 surveys, it's certainly not, majority, but it's more than we've ever had in any other community. Mm-hmm. And usually people who take the survey are the people who have a vested interest because they, in education and or the location. So I think we're looking at it where we need to take it with a grain of salt, if you know what I mean, but also a serious kind of straw poll of what we feel people are thinking. I think that on the 29th, when we have, in 1 week, if somebody wants to see this all drawn up and shown, we can show it then and get people's comments, and they can talk about it. When we have all the planning people and the facility, all the different town committees and stuff represented, and I think that we'll get more feedback. It's kind of cumulative, and things do change here, and we're trying to change with it. So we're not. I hope that this is a improvement. And it may change a few minds, but then it may not change a few minds. So is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know. I feel like I'm a stickler for data transparency, that if you add options.
We'd love to, but, how do you keep up with yourself? You know what I mean? How do you keep up with such a thing?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the candor there. Thank you.
Thank you. William O'Brien, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Hello, thank you, and thank you for all of the work that you've done on this project. I live at 49 Forest Ave Extension, so the right side of the diagram is 100% contiguous to my property.
Right.
And so I have just two questions. One is, everything back there right now is ledge. I'm curious about the process of leveling that entire area. And also there are, along the fence, there are trees. So is the intention that all those trees would come down? And I guess I have three questions. Would all those trees come down so that you had parking spaces there? And then the second question is, what's the plan for safely leveling that area without ruining my home or some of the other homes in the area? And then the third question I have is Forest Ave Extension, and maybe Ms. Angelakis can answer this, because right now with 200 students, that's a very, very busy road, Forest Ave Extension, even though theoretically people aren't supposed to be dropping off their kids there, they inevitably do. So at scale with 800 children, is there a way of proactively preventing people from coming down Forest Ave Extension, or maybe even managing it somehow, because it's already very crowded at the small level that it is right now? Thank you.
You know, I know exactly what you live there, so you know more, but I think I know exactly what you're talking about. So you live right there on that edge, right on that corner?
Yes, that's the right side of the screen is.
That's right. Yeah,
all
that's
my property. And
so it's very interesting, because I would say that the whole perimeter of this site has, like we focused in our talk at first about the top, you know, where the houses are, and trying to get some distance there and away and all that. Realizing that especially your house right there, requires some serious buffering. So if it means taking out a bunch of those parking spaces right there and leaving a bunch of trees, or planting a bunch of new trees right along there for buffering, that's the kind of stuff that we are obligated and want to do, especially because then it becomes kind of woods again in the back. And right at your house, you just happen to have one of those 2 or 3 houses that are like right there. So we would have to, and I mean obligated and want to, spend a lot of attention to your buffering and your zone right there. That's the first thing.
Lee, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please do.
Can I chime in? Hi, Mr. O'Brien.
Hello.
So the only thing I would say is that the difference between these proposals and what exists now in terms of the use of Forest Ave Extension is that it's a parking lot right now. There is no drop off. There was no roundabout created at the current Stanley School. And I'm no architect, I'm no traffic study person, but I would just say by visually looking at this, there's much more of a flow and a plan to come into the area and drop off. And that might, in and of itself, with a staggered start of the lower school and upper school, mitigate some of the Forest Ave Extension's traffic. But the other thing that I was thinking is, and I don't know the reality of this as these plans unfold, I will, is when we did the Safe Routes to School in that neighborhood, and we worked with the town and the community to make some of those streets one way at a particular time. Those are the only thoughts that come to mind right now. I really don't have any solid answers for you, but just looking at this is an outlined and very detailed roundabout drop-off plan, and that is something that does not exist at the Stanley School site right now. It's a parking lot that they tried to make a roundabout to drop students off on site. And that wasn't the way it was built. So I don't have answers, but those are my initial reactions to this.
I mean, the first thing we're trying to do is get everybody from parking on the streets, and because right now everyone parks on the streets and walks their kids in. And we want to make it easy and possible for people to drive in at Whitman. Certainly first of all, there would easily be a gate at your emergency at the end of your road so that cars couldn't drive on. So there's no sneakiness that way. The town, you'd have to talk to the town about how to keep people from parking on your street who don't belong there. It's possible that they would set up some kind of, so, I mean, it's off of I'm not allowed, I can't do anything about it, but I understand that problem. When it comes to the idea of ledge and all of that, there's a lot we can do here. I mean, the field actually, that's up top actually slopes. And this field would probably slope from the high end to the low end. We can bring in some fill and lift everything up to get above some of the ledge, and create just a little berm there. We can take out the ledge that, we have money in the budget for taking out ledge. And as we've described before, there's two kinds of ledge. There's the kind that can be pulled out by a machine, not chipped, just pulled away. And then there's the kind that you have to blast. And when people hear blast, they say, oh, my foundation and stuff like that. And that is certainly something that we would, and the whole project team would have to write into the specification that there would be a whole protocol for ledge removal, for finding it, for insurance, for all those kinds of things. And what I try to do is say, it's best if you can build up and smooth those over and avoid it. So for example, if there was a ledge outcropping and I wanted to put a parking space out there, maybe I just don't put in those parking spaces and I move the road over 5 feet. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We want to avoid those problems rather than going at them. And but at this stage, without those kind of complex plans, all I can say is it's certainly feasible, but we'll have to work through it. And there's going to be a lot of meetings about it. And you're going to be somebody who we're going to meet with a lot because you're right there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. If no other questions, I'm going to move on to the next person. Becky Mueller, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Hello. So first, thank you for showing the traffic patterns when you were drawing the different site constructions. That was really helpful. One thing that this does raise for me, though, is a number of concerns. The first being the impact of the middle school's traffic in combination with the Stanley School traffic, which could lead up to upwards of 1,000 cars between students and staff across the two schools, and they're in very close proximity to each other. So it just seems to me that our neighborhood roads aren't built to handle this type of traffic, which could result in further construction down the road when we're looking at improving roads to handle the flow of traffic from both of the schools. So how are these plans going to account for the influx in cars to the Stanley site in conjunction with the middle school cars so that we don't have to have further road construction later on?
Rebecca, are you on? Is
Yes.
Rebecca?
Hi, I am on. Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
You can ask David to go to any of your drawings if you want, and you want to talk about this specific issue.
Yeah, so one of the things that we obviously looked at was having staggered arrival and dismissal times for the middle school and the Stanley School, similar to what they do right now, in fact, so that it helps to even out the traffic over the morning arrival and afternoon dismissal time so that you don't have a huge influx of cars coming in at one time. It also does allow a parent to go pick up their middle school student at the middle school, come back out onto Forest Ave, loop around and get into the pickup line at the elementary school as well, so that they can do those 2 different pickups and really make only one trip to the same area. So that was kind of part of why we have the staggered times to be able to handle the traffic. the additional volume of traffic coming through the intersection in total is not all that dissimilar from what is going to the middle school right now. So if you think about the way that the surrounding roads handle the traffic that's coming into the Stanley School and the middle school now, it is not all that different than the volume of traffic that's coming into the middle school right now.
So I guess what my concern is, I see what you're saying, and I appreciate you explaining that, Rebecca. What I'm concerned about is that we're putting 900 students in this new school, and parents we know, and I'm a parent, and I also work at a school that has over 1,000 students in it, and pick up and drop off, even with the best made plans, can take up to an hour, if not longer. And when we're building a school for K to 4th graders, and we're having parents pick up kindergarten and first graders and navigating these massive long lines, and then go back over to the middle school or vice versa, our neighborhood streets are going to be swamped. And there is not a really good solution to making this a streamlined process, even with the best laid plans. And believe me, I've worked on this at the school that I work at, and even after multiple years, there is no solution to getting 1,000 cars through a very small space in an efficient manner.
Yeah, and that obviously was one of our big concerns, and why we looked at these various options that try to maximize the queuing space that's available on the site, so that we can get as many of the cars off of the road as possible. And one of the big things that we were trying to do was avoid backups that would extend back onto Nason Road, particularly for the options that were shown that had an egress point onto Cedar Road. Because obviously Orchard Road and Cedar Road are so close together that you can get into a gridlocking situation if that happens, if the queues do back up onto Nason Road. So the intent of creating as long of a queuing area on site as we possibly can is to be able to get those cars off of the roadway, so that we can keep the traffic flowing on the roadway as much as possible during those times.
Rebecca, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When I was on site, I spoke to a neighbor who, it wasn't Becky, but it was another neighbor who, when I described that it's not really 1,000 cars, that there's a whole formula for coming up with the number of cars that actually come to the school through parents, since, some of them are duplicate parents, like a parent with multiple kids. Then there's other factors. They were skeptical by the fact that you had gotten down to, say, on this chart, 525 vehicles when there's 1,000, when there's a possibility of 900 students in the school, by the way, not 1,000, and I realize that there are faculty coming before and after. So how do you talk about the number of cars? And I realize when people ask different questions, they're going to use different numbers. What do you feel is a legitimate or practical number of cars to think about that you're trying to deal with here? How's that for a question?
So kind of how we come up with the number of cars is looking at, we have 900 students at the school, and we actually got the address information for the current K through 4 students. So we looked at where, how many households are all of these 900 kids coming from. And so what that 900 kids relates to is just under 700 households, because obviously there are kids who have siblings within the school. And then obviously we did include some walking potential. So on a poor weather day, kids within a 1/4 mile radius would probably still walk. When you think about a 1/4 mile radius, that's the kids living right on Nason Road, Orchard Road, Cedar Road, Laurel Road. They're the roads that are immediately adjacent to the school. And for their parent to get in a car, sit in the queue and drive around would probably take 4 times as long as it would to just walk home in that time. So we assume that on a poor weather day, those kids are probably still going to walk to school. And that's about 6% of the kids that would walk to school. We also, about 2% of the kids in the town are bused for special needs reasons, or they would be outside of the 2-mile radius from the school, so they could be bused. We also look at what is a typical absentee rate for the school. And within the town of Swampscott, based on a study that was done back in 2017, on average, about 6.5% of kids are absent on any given day. And then we also look at early release. How many kids are actually released early for doctor's appointments, after school activities, whatever it may be. So then that removes an additional 3% of the kids from the population as early release vehicles. So what we end up being left with is a much smaller number of cars that are coming to the site, and that's where you see the 525 vehicles that are coming to the site in this option. Once we remove that walking potential, the few kids that are actually bused, the absentee rates, and the early dismissals, that's where we come up with 525 vehicles. That would be.
But I think that, just to respond again to that, Rebecca, is I think the number that's lower there, 593, that talks about, inclement weather days.
Right.
The questioner is a school teacher probably, or at least an administrator, and knows about schools and knows the difference between when it's raining and when it's not. When it's raining, everybody drives. So that number is your inclement weather day when you have most people driving. And I think that's a more, it's very important for us to design to a, not worst case, but, a practical case scenario at all times. And I think that's the real question here. From all of your knowledge and all of the things that you've done at so many other schools, there's so many, we need to be conservative when it comes to that.
Right. And obviously what we'd like to do is get all of the 525 vehicles that would happen on a good weather day onto the site. And then with a poor weather day, we would want to get those to a point where they're not creating undue traffic congestion in the surrounding area, where they wouldn't create a gridlocking situation. So if a couple of those vehicles were to extend onto Orchard Road, it may not be a huge deal, but if they're extending back onto Nason Road, then that starts to become a problem, particularly where we live in New England, and there are a lot of inclement weather days in New England that we have to think about.
There can be follow-up if you want, but I mean, I listen to Rebecca a lot, so it could be from someone else.
Thank you, Becky. And if you don't have any further questions, I'm going to move on to the next individual. Taryn, please unmute yourself.
Hi, how are you guys? Thank
Good,
you.
Hi, Taryn.
I do have just a few questions. They're actually kind of piggybacking on a few that were just commented and kind of a little more in depth. But for the traffic piece, I did hear how previously that was, I think Becky was asking about the traffic. I see why you all mentioned that some parents will benefit from going to the middle school or from this school if they're delivering multiple children. But I think the main concern is that the traffic still seems like a major problem, because every family from K to 8 is still going to be dropping off their kids and coming in from the orchards or forest and leaving through the orchards or forest. So I think it becomes a bigger problem. And like you said, on inclement weather days, it's almost 600 for this school alone. So if we look at the middle school with over 700 students, that has to be around 450 or 500 cars every morning and evening that is trying to enter or exit only one location on both sides. So, I mean, it still feels like the traffic issue is a major problem just because there's not, I mean, for example, I really like the Hadley 3 to 5 site. I feel like there's locations to drive around the entire site and do drop-offs that already exist. this feels like we can make a circle around the field interiorly all day long, but we still have to come in and out one entrance or egress from orchards or forest. Do you know what I mean?
Rebecca, do you want to respond to that again, or in a different way, or specifically?
Yeah, so it seems when we're zooming in on the school, like there's really only one entrance point into this entire area, because we just see the one entrance point off of Whitman and then the exit out onto Forest or Cedar. But really there are a lot of different ways in and out of this neighborhood as a whole. And that actually helps to spread the traffic out a little bit more evenly as we're coming into the middle school and Stanley School area, in comparison to down at the Hadley School, where kind of everyone is coming in onto Reddington Street and having to exit back out onto Route 129. There's actually a little bit more opportunity for traffic to disperse evenly across various roads in this area. And one of the things that actually helps the traffic flow in the area around the middle school and Stanley School sites is that the existing traffic volumes particularly during the afternoon dismissal period, are not very high on those roadways. So really your only traffic on the roadways is that school traffic in the afternoon. Where over at the Hadley School site, you have a lot of existing traffic on the road. So at that location, we were seeing queues that were backing up well onto Elmwood and back around to Route 129 that we wouldn't see in this location.
I would add or support that just objectively. When I look at the traffic diagram in the afternoon for pickup at Hadley, the traffic goes on many streets all the way out because there's actually no place other than, way past Reddington, and that's probably how it is now. So people are probably used to it, but because we're able to get queuing on site here, we're actually trying to improve that. I'm not comparing the two. I'm really just saying that I don't think it's necessarily true that the Hadley site is a better traffic issue. I think every place, and I think most places in Swampscott have a real traffic issue regardless, wherever you are. And I realize that. And Taryn, I wanted to ask you how you feel about possibly not using Cedar as an exit.
Well, obviously I'm in support of that because I am the corner house on Cedar Road, and we initially bought the house on a dead-end street with a giant field in the wetlands, and now it's going to be a giant building and a major egress if that were to go through. So yeah. Right.
So I just want you to know that I know this is kind of pandering, but I did listen to you specifically and was struck by your words.
I appreciate that, Lee. I am, and thank you, Rebecca, for answering that. I guess because I am in the neighborhood, it is something that most of us do, is go out or in and out orchard and in and out forest, because there's every other aspect around forest is kind of like going over a hill or out of the way. But yes, I understand why you're saying there's some way you're going to try to align things on the field. I guess my next question is for Lee. I'm just curious, when you talked about the blasting, because I think it's something that I don't even know the scale of that. How many neighborhoods or roads will this affect in terms of blasting or scraping? I think a lot of people are concerned about that because we know there's ledge, and it's a little confusing as to if we're considering modulars at some point because of the efficiency. Why wouldn't we just build on the new footprint instead of tearing down the field existing and then building a new one on the other side? Could we build on the existing footprint and then reduce the amount of blasting or scraping somehow?
Well, I understand what you're saying. Let's go to the actual drawing of 7D for a second.
I think it actually would be 7C would kind of have more
No, I mean, just the idea of building on the exact footprint. As you can see, the school is considerably larger. And I really don't think that you're going to gain any relief by trying to build on that exact footprint. First of all, obviously, you're not going to reuse the same foundation and all of that. You're talking about the idea of trying to find area. I wouldn't be surprised if that school, Stanley itself, has ledge underneath its foundations and was poured directly onto the foundations for support. That's very typical. So what we're going to do with our civil engineer and other is to look at the areas of ledge, map it out, and to find the right place to put the right elevation to put the school at to avoid as much ledge as possible. And we're going to test the ledge. And at this early stage, you don't really test the ledge, but we do know that there's ledge involved. And again, we put in money for it. We don't want to do a lot of blasting, but if we have to do some blasting, it's going to happen. You know what I mean? And it does happen for, I'm sure that even for houses in your area, there's been blasting. I'm not downplaying it. I'm just saying that it is something that there's a protocol for. I'm not an expert in it. I don't know if maybe Paul knows, the OPM knows more about it from other projects and they want to chime in on the idea of blasting and what happens.
I can
Go ahead, Paul.
offer that, can folks hear me?
Yes.
I can offer that, we do blasting for ledge on projects pretty frequently, and that there are strict protocols that are in force in order to be able to do the blasting, and that the blasting methodology is such that it's very controlled for two reasons. One, you don't want to disturb anything you don't want to disturb, but when you do disturb something, even other rock that might be in the area, you want to avoid that because you would have to pay more to extract it. So, we watch that very carefully as far as being able to control construction costs on projects, let alone the idea that, that it could disturb, property nearby. Part of the protocol that we would recommend and I'm sure would implement would be doing property surveys of the houses that are within 100, 200 feet of the site and the location of the blasting, and make sure that we see that if at the conclusion of the blasting or the school construction project for that matter, if there is something that's disturbed in the foundation or something, we'll know by documenting that we looked at the building with pictures and so forth prior as to whether it was caused by the blasting or by the construction project. So all of those measures we take on any of our projects. And I just actually about 2 weeks ago we had a blasting program on another project. I took some videos of the blasts as they occurred, and I gotta admit I was kind of underwhelmed by the amount of I was kind of expecting that they'd be exciting to look at. They weren't. It was a little bump, and probably the most loud and disconcerting sound on a construction site isn't necessarily blasting. It's trucks and dropping things unexpectedly and really sharp, disconcerting noises like that, rather than the blasts where everybody's warned, that they're about to occur. And anyway, if anybody has any other questions about what blasting is like, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Karen, do you have any other?
I guess Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Thank you, Paul, for explaining that. I would love to hear a lot more about that because it is, I guess, it is scary when you look at the size of the footprint and you think about having to blast that entire thing. And all I can think about is why, when they built the Stanley School, they never leveled the field. And I feel like it must be because there's so much ledge, since you can see some of it coming through the field. I mean, they left it as this, raised field, and it really didn't have to be that. So I really worry about that with the size of this footprint. But yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for answering my questions.
I
And
mean, again, we would rather, what they did with that field is they actually built it up rather than dig down. And there's no reason why we can't, again, use some fill and things like that in order to mitigate the elevation or the height of things and avoid it. Remember, that's probably the most expensive thing on a job site, is to remove rock or ledge. And so we want to avoid it as much as possible. So we actually have incentive, like Paul said, to try to do it differently if we can.
I guess just my last question, and thank you for giving me the time. I'm just curious because I know you said there were specific questions about this site, so that's why you chose this meeting to kind of focus on it. But for the next meeting, I know you're all going to be going more in depth with various people involved in the project. Is it possible to, since the Hadley 3 to 5 and this Stanley site are the top two favorites from what you all mentioned on the previous meeting and the survey results and discussions, is it possible to look at both of those options as your top two presently in the next meeting and kind of hear about both of them?
Yeah, we want to, you're right, Taryn, and we did talk about this, the idea that this is really specifically because this had so many comments about this particular site and project that we really hit it hard. We want to go back to the idea that this is one site and then there's another site, and then that, like, we want to go back to that kind of equality of consideration. And certainly the reason we're doing this now is that so that on the 28th, we are able to, somebody's scribbling on the drawing. Hey, I drew that. So that on the we're doing this now to kind of introduce it so that on the 29th, we can show them much more equally in the same light, so that people can talk about them in that way. And I understand and I agree with you.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, and thank you all for answering my questions.
Thanks, Taryn.
Thank you. Doug, please unmute yourself. Dublin?
Dubin, yes.
Dubin, I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone's effort that they're doing tonight. I'm just going to read through my little list. It's going over a couple things that people have already mentioned a couple times too. I thought it's a 50-year school after we build them. I heard you mention 75 years or something like that. Parking lot. Every neighbor that abuts the school is going to basically have a 2-lane road going around closest to their houses than anything else. Where is the snow going to go on this road that's going around the whole outside of the school? Because we get a lot of snow for all of that area right there. The traffic area, if you do 800 cars, 20 feet per car, 5,280 feet in a mile, that's 3 miles of traffic coming into the school. The ledge, we have the hardest ledge in the country, bluestone. That's why everyone loves Boston sand and gravel or aggregate, because it's the best ledge in the country. It doesn't like just to break up. As far as Paul said, he is right. Ledge is the most expensive thing on the project is the ledge, which they never give you an exact price to do the ledge. They tell you after it's out, this is what it cost. But it is a very precise field that they drill it, blast it. It's not exciting at all. They do know how to do it, but it is very costly and it's not an exact science anymore. They have to blast it. Sometimes a lot of it comes out, some of it doesn't. Leveling all the areas with hammering is just very cost. The budget at $115 million, how much does that cost the town? Are we going to send this out to bid, and is it going to be the lowest bid that gets the school? Which we know what happens when we get the lowest bid. We get a high school with no air conditioning and things that aren't working properly. How many kids are close to Stanley? How many kids are close to Hadley? And that's all. I just thinking about things. There's a lot of good points that are coming up. I'm still looking for the best thing for Hadley. I just sending 900 kids into this little corner of town twice a day, plus another school that needs renovations eventually too, is going to be tight. Thank you very much for everyone. Have a good night.
Doug, what do you do for a living?
I'm a contractor.
Right. I could tell that you've seen all this and you're being very straightforward about it, and I appreciate that.
And I've worked and I've lived in Orchard Road my whole life. I own 2 properties, one on Orchard Circle, one on Orchard Road. My house is the corner house.
Right.
There's just going to be a parking lot right in my backyard now where there's woods everywhere right now. There's a barred owl that hoots every night lately. Yeah. There's coyotes, there's foxes, there's everything. And I'm not for a school. Our town needs a school. We need the best thing for our kids. And I think Stanley needs to be helped and renovated. It could use a new school. I just don't know at this particular time if we need to spend $115 million at Stanley. I'd rather spend $5 million at Stanley and get it up to shape, and spend another $5 million at Clark and get it up to shape, and spend $60 million at Hadley. It's just a plan everyone's trying to come up with. I hope we all can come up with the right plan and see where we're going to go from there.
Thank you. That was very reasonable. To answer your questions, I don't think we can talk about ledge other than we have an allowance for it. And you're right that it is one of those things that have to be mapped out when they do it, and then you find out after and you do allowances. I will say that certainly the OPM team has made an estimate that is conservative at this point on
very
purpose.
Conservative of it.
Yeah, they're trying. Yeah. And that's, you're right to mention snow, because snow is always a big issue. Like, where are you going to stack all that snow and all that? These are things that we would, with our civil and our landscape and all the engineers and all of the meetings that we have with people like yourself, come up with, and facilities. I mean, Max Casper is now the facilities director for the town, and he's going to have lots of demands for us.
Which Max is a very good person for our town. He's going to help us a lot. He definitely understands a lot of the building and stuff like that.
Yeah, so all we can do is listen and solve problems. But you have a good list, and all I can say from that list is those are all things we have to address. And in terms of the traffic and the 3.5 miles of traffic that you're talking about, that's kind of a different kind of math, you know. That's kind of like saying I got a lot of paper clips, you know, how many does it take to get to the moon? We have a traffic engineer who kind of explains it in a different way, and they have models and all that. I'm going to listen to them as much as we can, but also we can do and you know, traffic and more traffic analysis and all of that. I'm not trying to say that traffic's not a problem, because it is, and that's why we're dedicating so much time to it. And it's kind of like if you played against Michael Jordan, you want to contain him, you can't stop him. And we're never going to solve traffic in Swampscott, but we can try to alleviate pressure points and all of that. That's all I can think right now to say.
I totally agree with that. And another thing is I hate to lose one of our properties at the other school to sell it to try to reimburse some of the money back to us. I think it's
I think they had this big a couple of weeks ago, the town had a kind of a meeting where they talked about ideas. Peter Spelios, you were part of that. Talk about ideas for Hadley that were ahead of time, if that was the case. Like, we don't want to make it sound like Hadley, we wouldn't build on Hadley because the school may be on Hadley. But the idea was that people know that there's a history, and I've heard about it, a history in Swampscott of a school being gone and then becoming condominiums. And people had a lot of really different ideas about Hadley being a downtown place where you had more like senior housing or I heard like arts, lots of different ideas rather than it being treated the way that it had been treated in the past. If somebody from the town wants to talk to that, I think it's still a relevant issue.
Yep.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Doug. And we want to do what's right.
Lee, anytime you'd like to know anything about the Stanley School complete surroundings, I've been here for 55 years. I'd love to help you with any questions that you have.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
George Schwartz, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, and thanks for the presentation. Thanks to my fellow residents for the great questions, because it brought up other things. I just want to start with just a little feedback on what it feels like with blasting, because I'm currently I'm right across from Bill O'Brien on Forest. So right, not abutting Stanley, but definitely looking down and very close to it. But I used to live on Morningside Drive right near across from the water tower when the 400 Paradise Road apartments were built. And that blasting I felt from there, which is much further, well, not much further, it's further than any of the residents who've spoken tonight. It's further than Cedar, it's further than Orchard, and it definitely created cracks I noticed in the foundation. So I think it will be felt, like me and Bill and Doug and everyone else who chimed in. Specific question on these two new plans, which I kind of noticed that the exit uses more of the UU than before. So is there an update on their willingness to allow that? And if it's still kind of vague, I mean, what is the town's, if this plan happened to go forward, what is the town's answer for that? Is there going to be taking it by eminent domain or some other sort of mediation with that? So I had many more questions, but I'll start with that one.
Mike?
Sure, it's a great question. We have had a number of conversations with the Unitarian Universalist Church over the past few months. I think there's room for continued conversations with them if it's something that they want to work together with the town. If the UU decides they don't want to work together with the town, we'll figure out what needs to be done. An easement, in the public interest is certainly something that is, within the realm of possibility.
I will say that, I'm not as involved in that, but I will say that this particular approach is the least approach, just going through the parking lot like an out is very different than where we started and listened to the church about. We had a drop off there and park, and a lot of other things that we were looking at. And we're trying to minimize our effect on everybody because there's a lot of pressures on every side of the site. And so we're trying to minimize that in any way we can, yet still have a very functional pattern.
I will say that they have articulated some of the same complaints that the neighbors on Forest Avenue Extension have articulated, of parents just showing up and dropping off and whatever, and being no control, no restriction, no enforcement. And, I would hope that the UU would step up and say that's something we want the town to come and do as part and parcel of this conversation. So far, that's not been what they've had to say.
Okay. Well, thanks for addressing, where things stand and sort of the vagaries around that. I think there was so much going on and so many great feedback that brought up other things, and I think I might have gotten lost in my other questions about the project. I think some of them were answered, and that the next meeting will consider the two main sites. So I see that this is really just sort of a presentation on these two plans. Vivian, I think, addressed or alluded to why these were being presented. Or is it just feedback, or were there some problems beyond feedback with the 7A and 7B, or were these just sort of just other options that came about with feedback to the survey?
Well, this is really easy for me. When you do a job, there's the beginning stages of it where you kind of test it and you put certain things on the site and it becomes what it is. But we realized after listening to comments and taking it seriously that we could make it better. And we felt, and I'm saying this as someone who is as a professional, we suggested that we could show designs that directly worked with people's comments in terms of stepping and scale and things like that we had learned by listening. And so there's not necessarily something wrong, but it could be much better. And that's how I feel about it. So we wanted to show you something that addressed the comments. That's all.
Great. Thanks for that clarity. I appreciate that. So I guess, those are my questions. And again, thank you both. And thanks to my fellow residents again, because I think their questions brought up a lot of other insights for me, especially the realization that if this went forward, we would have Swampscott entire K through 8 within a sort of 0.2 of a mile from each other. So it was I was focusing on this more, and it didn't focus on the fact of how close almost 2/3 of the schooling of this town will be to each other and the traffic problems. But I think you've gone into that, and I will let you go, and thank you again for your time and allowing me to ask questions.
Thank you, George. I hope we addressed some of the questions you had about traffic as well. I mean, granted, yes, 2 major schools will be, but there is a plan in place to address the overflow and the traffic as well.
Yeah, I still think there's a problem. I mean, I know, I understand Rebecca's points, but I find that you should always assume the higher numbers, and and her points, which she made last time too, about this deduction. Yeah, you're hoping on those days, but I really, I would hope that the assessment is really how can the school provide for good traffic when you really have the highest capacity, in the hopes that, you may have days where you don't have to deal with that. But yeah, I mean, people have answered it. I don't think it has alleviated my concerns about the traffic, though, just to be fair.
Okay. Thank you so much, and have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Tyler Hinckley, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you.
Tyler.
Hi. So I, first of all, like many have done here, I just want to thank the team for the responsiveness of not only the alternate options, but just the process of shifting meetings and making room for the comments. I think it has shown a great kind of cooperation, and appreciate that approach. So thank you for that. Specific to these designs, because I'm trying to give my comments relative to what's been presented. The caveat that is, I still personally, as a parent, feel that the more distributed approach with a smaller, maybe a new school on this site, but a smaller school on a smaller, the existing Clark, and I think that a district-wide 3 through 5, I personally think that that's a better fit for our town, educationally, kind of scale-wise. But I think that there's some important ideas here within this presentation this evening, and I think that this shows that those modifications made really have a dramatic impact on the perception and the experience of the building, the site, the spaces around it. So I think that the 7D option really responds to that, and I think you were kind of hinting at it, Lee. One of the things that I notice is by kind of making more of one front door, it makes for a much more efficient use of all of the site, not just inside the building, but the rest of the site. It makes for a clearer understanding of the building and a clearer use of the building. So I really appreciate that.
Tyler, I just want to say that I know you're an architect, but the things you said were just so straightforward and like perceptual in terms of experience. I think this particular design is about those things that you talked about the real experience of the school. And I think that it allowed us to see it a little more than just a diagram and more of a place. And I appreciate you for helping to open that up.
Well, I'm very happy to be part of that discussion. I think that the exercise of mapping out this previous outline on the site is incredibly instructive. And I think what's important to note with the alternate proposal here is that you pulled back from the corners, both at the Whitman entry and at the northwest corner, and that those are very, good moves. Both those corners felt very tight to those conditions. So I think that that's a very positive move in that direction. So I appreciate that. I generally, I think that if we can leave Stanley, if we have to do this project here, leaving Stanley and not having trailers is preferable. That always sounds like a bad idea for a parent to have to deal with. So I think that this solution is better than the other one, even if you did take down Stanley. I think it makes for a better layout, more compact, yet more kind of privacy of the wings. So I like that better. So I guess my comments about the progress here is generally positive. I think that there shows a lot of response to the comments. Full disclosure, I still prefer the 3 through 5 option, just from a general kind of fundamental approach to schools in the town. But there's definitely shows a better option for this site. So I don't know that I have a great question. I just wanted to make those comments and acknowledge that I had a lot of questions previously, and that I felt like I was being heard.
I'm glad. Thank you, Tyler. And that is honestly all we try to do, is listen to the community and try to respond accordingly. So thank you for your comments and your feedback, and we'll look to hear from you again in the future. If nothing further, I'm going to ask Eric Schneider, who's patiently been waiting, and our last candidate with his hand up, to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Eric, for your patience.
So I must admit I signed on late and missed a lot of the presentation, but I see the new design and it looks very interesting. I'll have to catch up on the first part, but I had one question about the Stanley site on the topography.
Yes.
So and I don't know if this was covered earlier, and if it was, I'll listen to that. But essentially, when you stand on the parking lot at Stanley today, and you look up towards the UU, I don't know how many feet it is, but it's I don't know, is it 15 or 20 feet difference between the parking lot and essentially where the ledge is?
Well, I'm going to use rough numbers that I remember, but if you go to the top right of this drawing, and then you go to the kitty corner to the bottom left, which is where the UU is.
Yep.
That's the greatest amount of difference. And I think that's around 10 feet or something. And I could be wrong, but we do have an old survey that I think that was around 10 feet. But what's interesting is, go ahead.
Oh, so at what level would the ground floor of the school be, and at what level would the exit of the road that sort of exits through the UU parking lot? I mean, would that be essentially a 10-foot difference from that piece of road down? Would there be a...
Yeah, there's a subtleness to all this that we'd have to figure out, but the site actually warps. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't just move in one direction from there to there. It actually, when you come in at Whitman, it also slopes up towards Ewing Woods. So when you get to the Ewing Woods side, it's more level along that whole edge. Do you know what I mean? It might go up a little bit from right to left. You know what I mean? So the whole idea here is we're going to look to see if we can take the elevation of the school and drop it like 2 or 3 feet into that area where the field is. And then that brings it a little lower so that when you come in at Whitman and you come around, you kind of slope up on the street and you slope down a little bit. And then where the entrances are in the middle, so it may slope up to those entrances on one side and then connect. Now, if you're a civil engineer or something, it's not fair. And I don't have the information. We haven't graded the whole place. But certainly it's not, our job is to alleviate the slope so it doesn't feel dramatic. And it kind of goes with the points of those corners.
So the school wouldn't essentially be brought down to the level of the parking lot.
No, because that would bury it. Actually, it would kind of find its middle ground, literally its middle ground, and try to find the place where the entrance is, and the school can kind of nestle at the right height to kind of take both of those sides and find the middle spot so we can slope up and make it work. You want to slope away from a school anyway, a little bit. But I think that if we're subtle and we're smart about it, we can make even these long sloping area of the site function properly, not feel funny.
And then, so it looks like you've put a lot of work into, the option, I guess, at the Stanley site. And I was just wondering if you could talk about whether you're looking into any redesigns at the other sites. Have you gotten any comments that would lead you to make any changes there? And
I think that's it's kind of like where we started. Most of the purpose of this meeting was to show, because the Stanley area neighbors and comments were so prolific, the very first slide of this is a list of all of the comments.
Mhm.
I mean, you might have missed that.
Yeah, I
David,
did. I'm sorry.
Go to the very, I just want to do this. Go to the very first page because I think it's a good full circle. Right there, we were showing the old, the previous kind of diagram design. And then on the right are all the things that we've been specifically talked to and talking about with comments about the scale, about the experience coming right in off of Whitman and hitting a 3-story building, about the views and the perimeter and the use of all the edges and stuff. And our job was, now that we kind of saw all that, to take the diagram and to push it, to challenge ourselves on the Stanley site, because we're not getting all the same questions at the Hadley site the same way at all. Do you know what I mean? At the next meeting on the 29th, when we present this, our goal is to show maybe the 7D or something like that, and the Hadley site and the other, to have people look at them equally and compare and contrast and talk about them with equal graphics, equal approach, and equal time. That's our hope. And we wanted to do this tonight in order to catch this up and let people know that we listened. And so that would be next week is the time where we would say, hey, these are the 2 or 3 enrollments and sites that we think are the ones that meet the needs of everybody the most. Let's look at them. But we really, again, I have said it as a professional, I just felt like this one deserved, with all of the comments, as you heard Tyler, who's an architect, say, we really wanted to update it and show that we were listening, especially here where there's so much pressure. So it's not favoritism. It's really just trying to make sure that everything we do is to a good level.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate all the work and time you guys have spent. I mean, it's been interesting to follow.
Thank you. Eric, if you don't have any other questions, I don't see any other attendees with their hands raised, but I'm going to turn back to the SBC group and ask if they have any questions, comments, thoughts to share before we end the meeting tonight.
Again, with the caveat that it should be questions and not any kind of deliberation.
Yes, thank you.
And then Vivian, are we going to go to a slide that just shows our next steps again?
We can go back to the next steps, and the next steps being the September 29th, we're planning a SBC joint meeting. I know Suzanne, you had further updates on that one, but
yes. So that one, you know, Michael's invited a lot of boards and committees that have kind of a stake in this, like the open space and recreation, the renewable energy council, or council for ages for all. Wait, what is this? Swampscott for all ages, Swampscott for all ages, planning, earth removal, some committees like that. So we can hear what people have to say about what those committees have to say about each option, and if they have some concerns, what they might be and how we might mitigate them, what their suggestions are. And then on the what's not on this slide is that on September 30th, the school building committee has been invited to join the finance committee, the select board, and the capital improvements committee to review financial implications of each option as well. So that's an additional meeting on the 30th. And then with the information from this meeting, those 2 meetings, the surveys, you know, we'll be able to really deliberate on the 13th to get to our preferred solution.
So the deliberation meeting will take place on the 13th with intent for October 20th, whatever decision has been made on the 13th to be presented back to the community of the preferred solution. And the design team along with us will be working to providing all of the documentation and information needed on October 6th to the MSBA for the preferred schematic report submittal.
Yeah, I mean, if we find after the 29th and 30th, if we need another one, we have a week, we have an extra week between the 29th and 13th if we need to schedule something, but for now, we'll keep the schedule and try to make this work.
Excellent.
That's all I got.
It's already a lot. So we look to hear from everybody on the 13th and participate along with this community and the SBC on the 29th and the 30th as needed.
Right. Sounds good.
So
So are we good?
I don't have anything else to present. If anyone else does, please feel free.
Seeing no hands, how about a motion to end the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, Pam, a second.
Second,
Who was that?
Michael, second.
Michael. Oh, thank you. Anyone who's opposed to ending the meeting, raise your hand or shout it out. I see nothing, hear nothing. So the meeting is adjourned at 9:12. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.
Thanks. Yeah.